All right, so you know how sometimes you just feel like you know one thing leads to another? Like, hey, if I just buckle down and study harder, I'm guaranteed to ace that
Oh,
test.
absolutely.
But then you see those classmates who practically live in the library and still barely scrape by. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, what are the real driving forces behind success? Especially when we're talking about how people learn and what keeps them motivated. It's a bit of a head scratcher sometimes.
Yeah, it really is. And, it's so natural for us to try and connect the dots, to look for those patterns, but actually zeroing in on those true triggers, the real cause and effect relationships, well, that's a whole other ball game, especially when you're dealing with the complexities of human behavior. It's a puzzle that social scientists have been grappling with for ages, trying to find those reliable cause and effect relationships.
And that's precisely where our deep dive today comes in. You've gathered some seriously fascinating research, and at the heart of it all is this paper by Fan and Ngu. They really dig into experimental design in the social sciences. And our mission today, well, we're going to take a deep dive, a real under the hood look at how researchers craft these studies that give us more solid evidence that A is actually causing B, not just that they happen to show up together at the party.
Exactly.
We're talking about going beyond those simple before and after scenarios and exploring some pretty ingenious methods that help researchers isolate those causal links. So we're going beyond just correlation, we're looking for causation.
That's exactly right. We're aiming for that gold standard of evidence. And as you mentioned, the Fan and Engu paper, Undertaking Experiments in Social Sciences, sequential, multiple time series designs for consideration, that's going to be our compass, our guide through this intricate landscape. They do a phenomenal job of laying out the groundwork, those fundamental principles, and then taking us on a journey through some truly innovative approaches to understanding causality.
Perfect. So before we get into the nitty gritty, let's zoom out for a second and talk big picture. Why is this whole causality thing so important, especially in fields like education, psychology, really across the whole spectrum of social sciences?
Sure. Well, think about it this way. It's like in these fields, we're constantly trying to figure out if making a specific change like introducing a new teaching strategy, switching up how we give feedback, or implementing a program to amp up motivation actually leads to the outcome we're hoping for. And these outcomes, they really matter. The paper dives into some great examples, like whether designing instruction in a certain way truly helps students become better problem solvers in math, or whether having a strong self-concept, that belief in yourself, actually translates into better academic performance. And we can't forget about the ethical implications, right? If we're going to invest time, money, and effort in these interventions, we need to be reasonably confident that they're actually making a positive difference and not just spinning our wheels.
Absolutely. It's about making sure those efforts are truly impactful, not just well-intentioned. And, it seems pretty obvious, but simply observing things happening together, that's not enough to prove cause and effect. I was reading about how those cross-sectional studies, the ones that take a snapshot in time, or even those longitudinal studies that follow people over years but don't actively introduce changes, they can sometimes lead us down the wrong path when we're trying to figure out what's causing what. Like you said, they can point to relationships between variables, but not that one is causing the other.
Right.
It's that classic X leads to Y scenario, but as you pointed out earlier, it could just as easily be Y leading to X, or maybe there's some hidden variable Z pulling the strings on both of them.
Precisely. It's that correlation versus causation dilemma. We see these two things dancing together, but who's leading? And the paper even brings up some of Fan's own earlier work from 2008 as a prime example. That research explored relationships between students' goals and their study approaches, but it relied on correlational data. So while the findings might have suggested a link, claiming a direct causal relationship, well, in retrospect, that was a bit of a leap because that type of study simply can't definitively tell you which variable is influencing the other, or if they're both being influenced by some external factor. And that distinction between association and causation, that's crucial. We need to be careful not to jump to conclusions just because two things seem to hang out together.
It's a trap that's easy to fall into. So to really get closer to that cause and effect truth, we need to step into the world of experiments. We need researchers to roll up their sleeves and actively manipulate variables to see what happens when they tweak things in a controlled way. And the paper walks us through some of the classic experimental designs, starting with the simpler ones. Can you give us a quick overview of those and how they try to establish at least some level of causality?
Of course. So picture this. We start with the one group pre-test, post-test design.
Yeah.
It's like you measure something, let's say students' anxiety levels before a big test. Then you introduce a relaxation technique like deep breathing exercises and measure their anxiety levels again afterwards. If you see a drop in anxiety, you might suspect, hey, maybe those deep breathing exercises actually did the trick. But of course, it could just be a coincidence. So to strengthen the evidence, researchers often turn to two group designs. In these designs, you have one group that gets the treatment, in our example, the relaxation technique, and another group, the control group, that doesn't. Then you compare the outcomes, the anxiety levels in this case, between the two groups after the intervention. Now, the pre-test, post-test control group design adds an extra layer of rigor. It involves taking an initial measurement of anxiety levels for both groups before the relaxation technique is introduced. This helps you account for any pre-existing differences in anxiety between the groups. It's like making sure the playing field is level before the game starts.
That's a smart move.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's the post-test-only control group design. This one skips that initial measurement, but you still have those two groups, one getting the treatment and one serving as the control, and you compare their anxiety levels only after the intervention.
So it's streamlining the process a bit, focusing on the outcome after the intervention.
Precisely. And the paper cleverly uses those early studies on attributional feedback by Chunk from the early 1980s and Bandura's foundational work on self-efficacy to illustrate how even these simpler designs strive to study those cause and effect relationships. Remember Chunk's research? It was all about exploring how different types of feedback, especially those focused on effort, impacted students' beliefs in their own capabilities.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how those early studies, even with these simpler setups, were already trying to dig into those causal connections to figure out if a teacher saying something like, wow, you're putting in so much effort, I'm really impressed, actually caused a student to believe more in their ability to succeed.
Right. It's all about understanding the impact of those subtle cues and how they shape students' perceptions. But here's the catch, and the paper highlights this. While these basic designs are a step up from just observing correlations, they still have their limitations when it comes to being absolutely positive that the treatment, and only the treatment, is what's influencing the outcome. There's always the chance that other factors are at play.
Like, maybe in Shunk's study, the students who got the effort feedback also happen to be in a classroom with a more supportive learning environment, or maybe they were just having a good day overall. It's hard to rule out those other possibilities entirely.
It is. And that's why researchers have been working hard to develop more sophisticated designs that can better isolate those tricky confounding factors.
Which brings us to the Solomon four-group design, a real star in the world of experimental design. It sounds way more complex, but also way more powerful. What makes this design so valuable for teasing apart those subtle influences that can muddy the waters?
Oh, the Solomon four-group design, it's truly elegant in how it's structured. Imagine you take those two group designs we just talked about, the pre-test post-test control group design and the post-test only control group design, and you combine them, like weaving them together. That's what gives you the Solomon four-group design with, you guessed it, four distinct groups.
So you're essentially doubling down on the comparisons, creating a more intricate web of evidence.
Exactly. And if you take a look at Figure 5 in the paper, it provides a nice visual blueprint for this design. While our listeners can't see it, it's helpful to imagine. Two of the groups receive a pre-test measurement before the intervention, like measuring those anxiety levels before the relaxation exercises, and two groups don't. Then, within each of those pairs, one group gets the intervention, the relaxation technique in our example, and the other serves as the control group, getting no intervention.
Okay, I'm trying to keep all these groups straight. So with these four groups, what kind of unique insights does that give you that the simpler designs can't? How does it help you see things more clearly?
What's brilliant is that this setup allows researchers to really tease apart the effects of several different factors that could be at play. It's like having multiple lenses to examine the same phenomenon. For example, by comparing the post-test results of the two groups that received the intervention, remember one of them had a pre-test and one didn't, you can see if simply taking that initial test, regardless of the treatment, had any impact on their final anxiety levels. Did the act of measuring anxiety beforehand in and of itself change anything?
So it's like controlling for the effect of the measurement itself.
Exactly. And then you can do the same thing for the two control groups, one with a pretest and one without. This helps you determine if any external factors, things happening in the environment or in the students' lives that you didn't account for, might have caused changes in anxiety over time, regardless of the relaxation exercises. And crucially, it allows you to see if taking that pretest somehow interacts with the treatment itself, making it more or less effective. So maybe those deep breathing exercises work better for students who've already had their anxiety levels measured. This design helps you uncover those subtle interactions.
That's amazing. It's like having a built-in detective to sniff out those hidden influences that could be skewing the results. And the paper brings it back to Shunk's effort feedback study, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how could you apply this Solomon four-group design to that type of research to gain even more clarity about the impact of effort feedback?
Let's picture it. You take those sixth-grade students, say 40 of them, participating in a study on effort feedback, and randomly assign them to 4 groups of 10. Group A, they get a pretest measuring their self-efficacy in math, how much they believe in their ability to do well in math. Then they receive that effort-based feedback from their teacher, like, wow, you're working so hard on these problems, I'm impressed with your effort. And finally, they take a post-test measuring their self-efficacy again. Now, Group B, they also get the pretest and post-test, but they don't receive any specific feedback during the intervention period. They're kind of like our baseline.
Okay, I'm following you so far.
Good. Now, Group C, they skip that initial self-efficacy pretest, then they get that same effort-based feedback and wrap up with the post-test. And finally, we have Group D, the simplest of them all. They just take the post-test. No prior self-efficacy measurement, no feedback, nothing. Just the post-test. So, by comparing the self-efficacy scores across these 4 groups after the feedback intervention, researchers can really start to disentangle the true impact of that effort feedback from other potential effects. It's like separating the signal from the noise. Like maybe taking that self-efficacy test twice, regardless of the feedback, influenced students' beliefs about their abilities. Or maybe there were other things happening in the classroom during that time that affected their self-efficacy. This design helps you see those things more clearly.
It's like having a filter to isolate that specific effect you're interested in.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, in a perfect research world, the Solomon four-group design sounds like the holy grail for establishing causality. You're accounting for so many potential confounding variables. But of course, the paper doesn't shy away from the practical challenges, especially in real-world settings like schools, where things aren't always so neat and tidy. What are some of the limitations that researchers bump up against when trying to implement this design?
Right, it's a powerful tool, no doubt, but it's not without its limitations. And the paper does a great job of acknowledging those. One of the biggest hurdles is the sheer amount of resources it requires. You need a larger pool of participants to start with, enough to divide them into 4 groups that are statistically meaningful. Each group needs enough data points to reliably detect a real effect if it exists, which is what statisticians call statistical power. It's all about making sure you have enough data to draw valid conclusions. And logistically, well, managing 4 different groups in a school environment can be a real juggling act. Randomly assigning students to those different conditions, coordinating the intervention across those groups, scheduling multiple testing sessions, it can be quite a feat. And let's not forget about the financial side of things. Running a study like this can be expensive.
Yeah, those are definitely real-world constraints that researchers have to grapple with. And, it makes sense that as students get older, a design like this, with its multiple measurements and different conditions, it could become more disruptive to their regular routines, which can impact both the study itself and the school environment.
Exactly. And sometimes you just might not have a large enough student population to split them into 4 viable groups, especially if you're working with a smaller school or a specialized program. Those sample size limitations are real.
So it's a bit of a trade-off, right? You're
Yeah.
gaining this incredible rigor and control over the variables, but it comes with some practical baggage, which is why researchers often turn to those quasi-experimental designs when those true experiments, like the Solomon four-group design, just aren't feasible. And the paper spends a good chunk of time exploring time series designs, which fall under that quasi-experimental umbrella. Can you walk us through the basic idea behind these designs and what makes them useful?
All right, let's unpack time series designs. So, quasi-experimental designs are what researchers use when they can't randomly assign participants to different groups, like in a school setting where students are already in pre-existing classes, or when they don't have that traditional control group. It's about making the best use of the situation you have. And time series designs, they're all about tracking changes over time. So instead of just taking a measurement before and after an intervention, you take multiple measurements of the outcome you're interested in, both before and after the intervention is introduced.
So it's like taking the pulse of the situation over a longer period, not just at 2 isolated points in time.
That's a great analogy. It's about capturing the trends and patterns over time. A classic example is a teacher tracking a student's scores on weekly quizzes over a month. Then, the teacher implements a new study technique, like flashcard review, and continues to track those quiz scores for another month. This way, you can see if the pattern of the scores changes noticeably after the new study technique is introduced. And if you look at figure 6 in the paper, it illustrates this basic time series design beautifully. The core idea is to see if the data, those quiz scores in our example, tell a different story once the intervention kicks in.
And I'm guessing that to make this even more robust, you can add that control group element, right? Like have one group of students using the new study technique and another group that's not, and track both of their quiz scores over that same time frame. That's the multiple time series design.
You got it. Adding that control group, as shown in figure 7, that's what really strengthens the evidence. You're not just relying on changes within a single group, but you're comparing those changes to what's happening in a group that's not receiving the intervention or is receiving a different intervention. This helps you rule out the possibility that other things happening at the same time as your intervention, those pesky confounding variables we keep talking about, might be responsible for any changes you see. Like, if both the group using the flashcard technique and the control group show a similar improvement in quiz scores, well, you might start to wonder if those flashcards are really the magic ingredient. It could be that something else is happening that's boosting everyone's scores.
So it's all about having that comparison point, that benchmark, to see if the intervention is truly making a unique difference.
Exactly. And the paper provides a really interesting example of this, comparing the effects of giving students feedback on both their ability and their effort, like telling them, you have a natural talent for this, and you're also working really hard, versus giving feedback only on their ability, like saying, you're really good at this. By tracking changes in self-efficacy over time in both groups, you can get a better sense of which type of feedback might be more effective.
Now, this is where things get really exciting because Fan and Winna go beyond those basic time series designs and propose some incredibly innovative extensions. I feel like we're entering the realm of experimental design wizardry here. Let's start with their sequential multiple time series multi-group design. It's quite a mouthful, but I think we can handle it. What's the core idea behind this intricate sounding design?
It's a bit of a tongue twister, isn't it? But don't worry, it's not as daunting as it sounds. The key to unlocking this design is figure 8 in the paper. Picture this. Instead of just having one or two groups, you typically have 3 or more, and you follow them over a longer period, like 2 academic years in their example. And the sequential part comes into play because these different groups experience different treatments, but they experience them one after the other during that time frame. So imagine one group of students receives an intervention designed to boost their self-efficacy in the first year. Then in the second year, they receive an intervention focused on enhancing their self-concept, their overall belief in themselves.
It's like layering those interventions over time.
Exactly. And here's the clever part. Researchers often structure this with different cohorts, groups of students at different grade levels, starting the study simultaneously. So you might have a group of 7th graders, a group of 8th graders, and a group of 9th graders, all starting this 2-year study at the same time. Now, this is where it gets really powerful because it allows for 2 types of comparisons.
Oh, I love comparisons. Tell me more.
You have cross-sectional comparisons, where you look at the different grade levels at the same point in time. So you might ask, how does the self-efficacy intervention impact 7th graders compared to 8th graders at the very beginning of the study? It's about capturing those differences across grade levels. And then you have longitudinal comparisons, where you follow the same group of students over the 2 years to see how they change over time. So you might ask, how does receiving the self-efficacy intervention in year 1 and then the self-concept intervention in year 2 affect the same group of students as they move from 7th grade to 8th grade to 9th grade? It's about seeing how those interventions unfold over time within the same individuals.
I'm starting to see the elegance of this design. You're getting this multidimensional view of the interventions and how they might interact with students' development.
It's all about capturing those nuances. And the paper even provides those treatment effect, or TE, equations, which, while they might look a bit intimidating, they're essentially a way to quantify the magnitude of the intervention's effect at different points in time and for different groups. You can compare those effect sizes to see if, for example, the self-efficacy intervention has a stronger impact on 7th graders compared to 9th graders. It's about putting numbers to those observations and making those comparisons more precise.
So with this design, you could see not only if the self-efficacy treatment works, but if it works better for students at a particular developmental stage. Like maybe 7th graders benefit more from that intervention than 9th graders, which could have huge implications for when we introduce these interventions in schools. It's like finding that sweet spot for maximizing their impact.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is that you can do all of this even if you don't have massive sample sizes in each group.
And that's a big deal, especially in educational research where resources are often limited.
Absolutely. The fact that you can get such rich data and tease apart so many different effects without needing thousands of participants, that's a huge advantage.
It's a really elegant solution to a common challenge in research. Now, they didn't stop there. They also introduced another fascinating variation on the time series theme, one involving counterbalanced treatments. What's the rationale behind switching the order of interventions for different groups?
Sometimes it's not just about what you do, but when you do it.
Right.
And that's where this counterbalanced design shines. Take a look at Figure 9 in the paper. It's a great visual aid. Again, we have multiple groups being followed over time, and often there's a control group that doesn't receive any of the interventions being studied. But here's the twist. For the groups that do receive the treatments, the order in which they receive them is flipped. It's counterbalanced. So going back to our self-efficacy and self-concept example, one group might receive the self-efficacy intervention first, followed by the self-concept intervention a year later, while another group gets the self-concept intervention first and then the self-efficacy intervention.
So it's like comparing two different recipes. Both recipes have the same ingredients, but you add them in a different order to see if it changes the final flavor of the dish.
I love that analogy. And the reason researchers do this is to see if the order in which those interventions are delivered actually matters. Does it influence the final outcome? This is especially important when you're dealing with things that might be related to each other or could influence each other, like self-efficacy and self-concept, like maybe boosting someone's confidence in their abilities first. That self-efficacy piece makes them more open to developing a broader sense of self-worth, which is the self-concept part. Or maybe it works better the other way around. Maybe a strong sense of self-worth lays the foundation for building more specific confidence in academic abilities.
And the paper points out that this question of optimal sequencing, it's a bit of an open question in the research. We don't have a clear answer yet.
That's right. It's like a path less traveled in research. And that's what makes this counterbalanced design so valuable. It directly tackles that knowledge gap. By comparing the outcomes of the groups that received the treatments in different orders and comparing them to the control group that received no treatment, researchers can start to uncover some really interesting findings. They can see if there are what we call asymmetrical crossover effects, meaning one specific sequence of interventions leads to significantly better outcomes than the other.
And, thinking about it from an educational perspective, that could be huge. If we find that one sequence consistently helps students more than another, that could inform how we design interventions and programs in schools.
Absolutely. It's about optimizing those interventions, making them as effective as possible. And this design also allows you to see if receiving either sequence of treatments is beneficial compared to no intervention at all. Like, is it better to do them in a specific order, or is doing them in any order better than doing nothing? And it even lets you explore whether the effectiveness of a specific treatment changes depending on where it falls in the sequence.
Like maybe the self-efficacy intervention is more powerful when it's delivered first, or maybe it's more effective when it comes after the self-concept intervention. This design allows you to tease apart those subtleties.
Exactly. It's about digging deeper into the nuances of how these interventions work and for whom.
So we've been talking about these really sophisticated designs, these multi-group, multi-time point studies that generate a wealth of data. I'm curious, how do researchers actually go about analyzing all of that information? The paper touches on data analysis considerations.
That's where things get a bit more technical, but also really interesting. So think back to those basic pre-test, post-test designs we talked about earlier. For those, researchers often use straightforward statistical methods, like those repeated measures t-tests, to compare the average scores before and after the intervention within the same group. You're basically looking to see if there's a statistically significant difference between those two time points. But when you're dealing with these more complex time series designs, especially those sequential ones, well, you need more sophisticated statistical firepower.
Enter the big guns.
Right. Researchers often turn to techniques like latent growth modeling, or LGM for short. It sounds complicated, but the paper does a nice job of explaining the basic concept. It even references some foundational works in this area by Bolin and Curran in 2006 and McArdle and Nesselrode in 2003. If you're interested in diving deeper, those are great resources to check out.
I'm definitely adding those to my reading list. But before I get lost in the statistical weeds, can you give us a quick, plain English explanation of what LGM allows you to do that those simpler statistical tests can't? What's the magic of LGM?
All right, let's break it down. Imagine a doctor tracking a child's height over several years, taking measurements at regular intervals. LGM's kind of like that, but instead of height, we're tracking things like student self-efficacy, their motivation, or their academic performance over multiple time points. And instead of just comparing average scores at 2 points in time, LGM allows you to model the individual growth trajectories of those variables.
So it's like creating a personalized growth chart for each student, showing how those variables change over time, not just at two isolated moments.
Precisely. It's about capturing those individual journeys. And what's really powerful is that LGM allows you to incorporate those experimental interventions as factors that might explain and predict those individual growth patterns. Like, is there something about receiving that self-efficacy intervention that changes the trajectory of a student's self-belief over time? Does it make their growth steeper? Does it shift their starting point? Figure 10 in the paper gives a really nice conceptual overview of this.
It's like seeing how those interventions might nudge those individual growth curves in different directions.
Exactly, and that's something those simpler statistical tests just can't do. They're limited to comparing averages at specific time points, but LGM lets you model those dynamic, ever-changing processes of growth and development.
So it's not just about whether the intervention had an effect, but how that effect unfolded over time. It's like seeing the whole movie, not just a few snapshots. But I'm guessing that this level of statistical sophistication comes with a price.
You know it. And the paper acknowledges those limitations. LGM can be computationally complex. It requires specialized software and a good understanding of the underlying statistical assumptions. And like any statistical technique, it needs a solid foundation of data to work its magic. You typically need a decent sample size, a reasonable number of participants, and multiple data points collected over time for the models to be stable and reliable.
It's not a quick and dirty analysis, it's a more involved process.
It is, but the insights it can provide, they're often worth the effort.
Okay, so we've explored these large-scale group-focused designs, but the paper also dives into an alternative approach that brings the focus down to the level of the individual learner. Single-case designs. I'm really interested in this shift in perspective. What makes these designs so valuable, especially in fields like special education, where the needs of individual students are often paramount?
That's a great observation. Single-case experimental designs, they really shine a spotlight on the individual learner. It's about moving away from those group averages and really understanding how a specific student, or a small group of students, responds to an intervention over time. And researchers like Hammond and Gass back in 2010 and Horner and his colleagues in 2005, they've really championed the use of these designs, especially in educational contexts. And as the paper highlights, they've proven incredibly useful for informing those personalized educational practices that are so crucial in special education. It's about finding what works best for each student, not just what works on average for a group.
It's tailoring those interventions to the unique needs and strengths of each individual.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that Fan and Mingo, they take those multi-group sequential ideas we've been discussing and apply them to the single-case context. They propose a sequential, multiple-time series, single-case design, which is illustrated in Figure 11.
Okay, so they're bringing that big picture thinking down to the micro level. How does that work in practice?
Picture this. You have several individual students, each with their own unique learning profile. And each of those students experiences a different sequence or combination of interventions. So one student might receive self-efficacy training first, followed by those self-concept activities. Another student might get those interventions in the reverse order. A third student might receive both interventions concurrently, like a double dose of support, and then you might even have a control student who doesn't receive any intervention at all.
So it's like a personalized experiment for each student.
That's a great way to put it. It's about creating these mini experiments tailored to each individual. And by meticulously tracking their outcomes, whatever those might be, academic performance, motivation, social skills over multiple time points, researchers can start to piece together a really rich understanding of how those interventions are working or not working for each student.
So you could see if a particular sequence of interventions is consistently more effective for a specific student, or if their response changes over time.
Precisely. And you can make those comparisons across different students as well. Like, does student A, who received the self-efficacy intervention first, show a different pattern of improvement compared to student B, who received the self-concept intervention first? It's about making those nuanced within individual and between individual comparisons.
It's a really elegant way to blend the rigor of experimental design with that personalized focus that's so essential in education. But of course, no design is perfect. The paper also points out some inherent limitations of these single-case designs.
Right. As with any methodology, there are trade-offs. And one of the biggest challenges with single-case designs is generalizability. You're studying a small number of individuals, often in very specific contexts, so it can be difficult to confidently say that the same intervention or the same sequence of interventions will have the same effect on a larger, more diverse group of people. It's about being cautious with those generalizations.
So the findings might be incredibly valuable for those individual students, but it's harder to extrapolate those findings to the broader population.
Exactly. And another thing to keep in mind is that these designs often rely heavily on visual analysis of the data patterns. Researchers are looking for those clear, consistent shifts in the data that correspond with the introduction of the interventions. But those visual interpretations can sometimes be subjective. And then there's the potential for what we call reactivity, which is the idea that the very act of repeatedly observing someone can sometimes influence their behavior, regardless of the intervention. It's something researchers always need to be mindful of.
It's about acknowledging those limitations and interpreting the findings with caution. But despite those limitations, it seems like these single-case designs have a lot to offer, especially when it comes to understanding and supporting individual learners.
Absolutely. They provide a level of detail and personalization that those large group designs just can't capture.
And finally, we arrive at the grand finale, the most ambitious design of them all, the multi-time series, multi-group single-case design. Figure 12 in the paper lays it all out. It sounds like the ultimate synthesis, the culmination of all these different approaches we've been discussing.
It really is. It's like Fan and Gu took all the best ingredients from those different experimental designs and blended them together into this super design.
So what's in this secret sauce? What does this ultimate design allow researchers to do?
This design is all about integration, bringing together the strengths of multiple approaches. It incorporates multiple groups of participants, so you still have that group-level comparison. It involves multiple measurement points over time, so you're capturing those dynamic changes. And it includes that in-depth study of individual responses within those groups, so you're not losing sight of the individual learner amidst all those group averages.
Like having your cake and eating it too.
Right. You get the best of all worlds. And, as the paper explains, this comprehensive approach allows for a really multifaceted understanding of an intervention's impact. You can compare different groups receiving different treatments. You can compare individual participants within the same group, so you can see how much variability there is in how students respond to the same intervention. You can compare individual participants across different treatment groups to see if there are certain types of students who benefit more from one approach versus another. And you can track those changes over time at both the individual level and the group level.
So you could see, for example, if one type of intervention, on average, tends to be more effective for a particular group of students, but then zoom in and see if there are individual students within that group who are bucking the trend, either doing really well or not responding as well as expected.
Exactly. It allows for